Next on the schedule, if we want to dive right into it, is the Chalcid folks who have been doing these barbecues. I hope they explain what a barbecue is. Just as I'll turn it over to them for the background, etc. I'm not sure who's leading that, Jim. You and Luke are, or
yeah, it's going to be a tag team.
okay.
I'm going to start, and then I'm going to hand it off to Luke.
All right. So thanks everyone for this first, and welcome Jim and Luke to talk about how they're sort of organizing their community to update or to parse and to keep their database up to date for one of the hyperdiverse groups of animals in the world.
Okay, Luke, are you sharing your screen?
I am. Can everyone see it?
We can.
Yeah, it might be easier if I do it from here, though. For now.
Okay. Would you? I'm happy to trade off. I just figured.
I think that might be because there's a couple of other things I want to do, and I'm not sure I can do it. I'll have to share my screen at some point. So
that's fine if you want to.
Yeah, just to complicate things. Sorry.
No, you're good. Okay,
there we go. Like I said, I'm Jim Woolley, a professor emeritus of entomology at Texas A&M University, and the other person that's going to be presenting on this is Luke Kresslein, a graduate student in Harity's lab at UC Riverside.
And Jim, you may want to click on the share your presentation button, the little bottom square box, whatever. In other words, we're seeing the slide deck.
Are you seeing the slide?
Well, we're seeing the slide deck, right? The slide and the slides on
well, yeah, because I need to jump out and go to TaxonWorks at some point.
Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I think I'm just, even though this is a little bit clunky, I'm going to do it this way, and then Luke can show everybody how to do it right when he get to his part. So Luke has been one of the primary people that have organized these, and we have to, I think, recognize Debbie, who came up with the name and the concept barbecue. It wasn't me, even though barbecue is something we take very seriously in this part of the world. And Lucas got a nice picture of Texas barbecue coming up. But for those of you that missed my presentation on Monday, we have a large group of international group of people working on the superfamily Chalcidoidea, mega diverse, about a little over 27,000 valid species and some 23 families. Not to panic anyone, but the number of families is going to double here pretty quick based on some phylogenomics that we've done. Most of these species are either parasitoids of other insects or are associated with galls, and so they're very important in natural and biological control of insect pests, which is why I have a job and why Harity has a job and why Luke Kresslein is going to get a job. These things are very important to agriculture. So for many years, we've depended, our lives have depended on something called a universal Chalcidoidea database. And this was created by this young man, John Noyes, in Natural History Museum, London. And this is basically, he worked on this over most of his career. It was really a sort of a life project. And so, it's a comprehensive taxonomic catalog and catalog of papers on biology, natural history, use and biological control, et cetera, going right back to the beginning of zoological nomenclature. And it's now being served online by the Natural History Museum. The issue was, though, that John has retired, and he wanted to concentrate his time on projects that are very important to him, such as the incertidity of Costa Rica. And so he made his last updates to the database in March 2019. And then, as we explained on Monday, in 2019, we moved the database, it was ported over to TaxonWorks as a project. And that's where it currently resides. And so it is pretty much up to date in terms of uploading all of the Chalcidoid literature, for the last 3 years. I've pretty much kept up with that. I'd say it's within a week or two of being absolutely current. But what we have not been able to keep up with is curating the literature, because by the time we got UCD running more or less, on the rails at TaxonWorks, all of a sudden we were looking at a 2-year backlog of publications that needed to be curated, and of course, there's new publications coming out almost every day. So we were in kind of a hole with that, and Luke Luke is going to say a lot more about that in a second. Now, as I mentioned on Monday, because we've got at least 15 people that are actively curating papers, maybe more, we've had to keep this organized, and so we've made extensive use of the tag functions in TaxonWorks here. Every time I upload a paper, I tag it as either sources. I tag it as source unprocessed, and then I look at it to see whether it contains any nomenclatural acts, new species, new synonymies, new genera, what have you. And because what we want to do, we're sort of concentrating on the nomenclatural literature first, as at least to us as taxonomists, that's the most important. And then once people start processing papers, somebody will claim a paper, they can change the tag to source being processed. So that lets everyone know that that somebody's claimed the paper and it's in progress. So we don't get 2 people working on the paper at the same time. And then there's various tags for different levels of completion. So I thought I would just go, at the risk of getting too many balls in the air here. I'm going to show you how we do this in TaxonWorks. So we're in TaxonWorks now, and the filter sources. So these will be sources that are in the project. So that'll be Chalcidoidea sources. And then down here, we're going to look for unprocessed sources that have nomenclatural acts. And so there's this nice Boolean function here. So this is going to be both sources that are unprocessed and that contain nomenclatural acts. And let's keep our fingers crossed. There we go. Okay, so we're down to 112. We're down to 112 records, which is, we were at about 300 when we started this. Luke will say a little bit more about that. So then, here you're able to download this as a CSV file. You're able to grab a PDF of the document here if you want it. And so what we have done is create an Excel spreadsheet from this, and that is in a Google Drive here. Okay, so this is live, open today. People are working on it, and this just helps us keep straight where we're at. And I'll be updating this from time to time. We've made a major effort to try and catch up through 2020. Natalie Dale Sky in London suggested, why don't we set a milestone and at least catch up with 2020 first? And we've almost done that. So with that, I think it's time to hand it off to you, Luke. And I'll stop sharing. Are you muted, Luke? I'm not getting any audio.
Sorry, it took me a moment to find my little Zoom bar. That's my bad.
Not to twist your arm.
You think after 3 years of Zoom, I'd know where that is.
Yeah.
Anyways, so thanks, Jim, for the introduction to TaxonWorks and our filtering system. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the problem we were having and some of the solutions that we've come up with to deal with this backlog of curation. So like Jim said, in the last major update of the UCD occurred in 2019. And since then, over 650 plus publications have entered the UCD, but have not had the material from those papers curated and added to the appropriate taxa. And without a dedicated structure or a dedicated user whose job it is to deal with that backlog, we're kind of on this slippery slope towards a low utility database. You know, databases are only as useful as they are current. So what is the solution to that problem? Deb and I at some point ended up talking about this, and we came up with this idea of the TaxonWorks barbecue, which is not a real barbecue, mind you. That would be quite fun, but because it's digital, there's no food. But it's the idea of a small group of people coming together, working towards a common goal. And in our case, that common goal is curating papers for UCD at TaxonWorks. So what we tend to do is we set a regular meeting time for us. It's every other Wednesday morning for about 2 hours, something like that. And we work kind of synchronously and asynchronously to just slowly pick away at this backlog. And with people both sharing the work and working independently. And then we always have a kind of help room open so that if we get new members, people who haven't joined us for a barbecue, they can ask questions kind of away from the main room. But the goal being that the accrued small efforts of individuals over time will get rid of this backlog of papers. And here's that picture of barbecue that Jim was talking about. This is Texas barbecue, I believe. It's brisket.
Central Texas barbecue.
I'm sorry,
Best in the
Central
world.
Texas barbecue. Got to be really specific with the barbecue. All right, so our workflow. Step one, we got to gather the barbecue crew on Zoom. Like I said, we set a regular time period, and that seems to be really important. I'll show you a little bit later the kind of difference between this organized meeting and this kind of before the barbecue when we were just saying, hey, if you could please go curate papers, that'd be great. We found that this regular, organized, periodic meeting to deal with this problem has been very, very successful. So once we gather the crew, we usually have a little updates meeting, talk about where we are with our project, how close we are to our goals. Sometimes we talk about new ideas for what we can do in the barbecue. But once we get through that, we move on to the next step, which is to select our publication. And Jim showed you that Excel sheet. I wanted to bring it back up really quickly. Essentially, what you'll do is you go to our literature Excel sheet. We see what papers are in progress. We see what papers have been completed. And we see what papers still need to be started, and you find one that no one's working on, put your initials next to it, and then go grab the paper off of TaxonWorks and begin to parse out the different data that are essential for our database. In order to make sure that we have a uniform approach to this, we created a list of priorities. So that different curators knew what we cared about the most and what we cared about, we still care about, but care about maybe a little bit less. It's less essential. And that way we get all of the important information getting into the database first. I'm going to walk you through that priorities list as well. So these are our #1 priorities. We got to get our priorities in order if we're going to make progress. So priorities #1, we have to, of course, create our new species name and link it to the parent taxon. If it's a new species, if it's a new genus, we'll have to create the new genus and link it into whatever family or subfamily it's part of. Record the source and authors from which the new species, where the new species was published. Provide its original combination and rank. Because these are mostly new species from the last couple of years, these are fairly straightforward. It is usually the epithet within the publication. We don't need to do any linking, but every once in a while there are new combinations that need to be recorded in papers. Record the gender and form of the name, as well as its etymology, if that's provided in the paper. And then, of course, provide a global identifier, usually an LSID that links to Zoobank, so that the name can be found within that database as well. So once we have gone through our first priorities, we move to our second priorities, which is mostly type information. So we will go and record all of the information for the holotype into the buffered collecting event box. So essentially we just go to this material examined and, you know, type that word for word into the buffered collecting event so that it is present for users who are interested in that information. We also provide the preparation type. You know, there's a lot of different ways that chalcidoids are prepared. So it's really important to know the status of that type of material, where the specimen is deposited, or at least where the publication says it's deposited, any biocuration, catalog numbers, and the sex and life stage of the type as well. And then lastly, we move on to our third priorities, which is essentially the other type material. So records for paratype information and any depictions of the paratypes, as well as biological information. So that would be to create an OTU with appropriate citations and keywords, to make sure that we have the asserted distribution information from the paper, so that we get the nice, you know, highlighted areas on our distribution maps within the UCD. Excuse me. And then any biological associations. For us, that's primarily host relationships or plant associates, especially if they are brand new records, which is often the case when you get new species of chalcidoids. It's not infrequently that they are paired with new species of their host. And then lastly, any comparisons with other species of chalcidoids. And then finally, any photography, any images, illustrations that paper provides of our new species. So that's essentially our workflow for this barbecue. We have done 6 sessions of the barbecue. We did our kind of pilot episode on May 18th with 6 participants. Took a brief break and then got back to it in the middle of summer, and have done several more with fairly regular participation from our community. The one today is a little bit smaller, but that's because there were plenty of people over in TaxonWorks together. And we envision that we'll continue to do this bi-weekly as long as this continues to be useful, which I'm sure we can come up with once we've curated all of the material from 2020 to 2022. I'm sure there'll be additional material that's published in 2023, as well as other projects that we can approach within this framework. One that we've discussed a little bit is looking at making sure that all of the type information for species published before 2020 are correct and fully parsed. So some results. Since May of 2022, we have added 170 new species names to the UCD at TaxonWorks. Most of these have all of that information that we went through in our priorities list curated with them. To give you a framework, that is as many species in 4 months as we curated in the last 3 years of the UCD at TaxonWorks combined. which I'd say is a major acceleration in the amount of material curated within our database. If we look at this graph up here, you can see each barbecue from between May and August, because they are the major clusters of different colored bars. So you can see right here, here's our first barbecue right here. We then have our break that I mentioned between the end of May and the beginning of June, where you can see not too much has happened. Then we have our next barbecue. And you can even see that the bi-weekly nature of these barbecues. You can see a lot of people working this week, and then the following week we have our superstar Jim, who's done a lot of work on his own. Then we have our next barbecue, where we have our other superstar who shows up to every barbecue, Pamela, who's just blowing us out of the water when it comes to people who really put a lot of effort into getting species curated into our database. So every time we see a big cluster of bars, that's the work of our community coming together to get material curated. In conclusion, 148 papers have been curated. 21 of the papers are in progress and are probably headed towards completion this or next week. And we are almost caught up with nomenclatural papers through 2020 and are headed towards papers that were published in 2021. So we, of the unpublished papers through 2022, we have 508 papers which remain to be processed, and 113 of these have nomenclatural actions that are important to our database. But with the barbecue framework, I imagine we will finish these with relative rapidity and hopefully have a fully up-to-date universal Chalcidoidea database at TaxonWorks. And with that, Jim and I would like to thank you for your attention, and we'd be happy to chat with you about this framework or any other questions you might have.
Thanks, Luke and Jim. Questions, folks?
I'd like to say thanks for giving it a shot. This is Debbie.
Oh, hi, Debbie.
I think that I wanted to clarify too. This idea comes out of the world of programmers, and it's sort of riffing on pair programming, this idea of two heads are better than one when you're trying to accomplish something where you have some skills and they have some skills, and together you can accomplish together and learn new things. And I learned this model in the carpentries, the data and software carpentries world, sort of embodies this concept. And it was great to see UCD give it a shot. So thank you very much for that.
It's really important to note that Deb was both instrumental and inspirational in getting us to do this. And I super appreciate all the help we get from Deb all the time. You are probably the other rock star that needs recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd just like to say that we had talked about this for months and months and months, maybe years, and we just sort of floundering around and never really got anywhere. And was Debbie and Luke and Natalie in London that primarily got this organized and got us started. And as you can see, we think it's been a real success.
Well, it's really good. It's really good to see and good to hear. I'm glad. And honestly, I planted the seed, right? You did the work. So thank you for giving it a shot. I think it's interesting from what Matt alluded to last year when we were talking about community building, for groups thinking about ways to make their work sustainable. So if you're in a group where one person has been taking on such a large effort as keeping up with all the literature, can that be sustained? Is there somebody else in line to take over when that person can't do it anymore? And you can see already when Luke starts alluding to what can we do next?
Mhm.
So, because you can actually see light in the tunnel, you can see that the pattern in the process is working. And so you begin, I think, Jim, you probably feel better too, right?
Oh, yeah, no, I
Feel
was
better.
actually kind of panicked and discouraged that, that we had this big backlog and it kept increasing. And, I was trying to chip away at it, and a few other people were, trying to chip away at it. Natalie, Petter, Jansta, and Prague, and Parity, and Luke, but we just weren't really making the right kind of progress. And now we are. So I'm very hopeful now. I can sleep at night. Used to not worry about this one.
I think it's worth mentioning something that Natalie said after a couple successful barbecues, which was that, all of us care about this project, but kind of individually, it's really hard to find the time in the day to do this thing. We're all very busy. We have species to describe, trees to build, red tape to navigate. And the idea that we're really not doing anything together other than being on Zoom together and individually still working to curate. But the framework of being with people working on a goal really can be motivating to the community. You're all of a sudden, you're not alone, and you are supported and kind of held accountable also. I think this really flexible model kind of helps to deal with that general malaise that can come from the isolation of this kind of work. And I think that UCD is a success story that shows that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that it does is allow you to share expertise. So you have people in your community who are at various levels of expertise with regard to using TaxonWorks, right? So having that regular meeting also adds to that aspect of, it's not just about taxonomic expertise, but the system in which you're actually collating data, using data, and you have each other there as a resource. Oh, John, please jump in.
Yeah, I just want to chime in that one of the nice things about the barbecue too is having a bunch of people around that can answer questions really quickly, because all of a sudden you get stuck and you go like, oh, I can't remember how to do this again. And then all of a sudden somebody can say like, oh no, that's the way you do it, just do that. And that helps to reinforce things rather than sitting alone and getting frustrated and going like, I can't figure this out, and having to go look up the manual and do everything else. So cooperation is really important.
Yeah, that's been a major feature. I mean, I've logged, I don't know how many hours in TaxonWorks, but if you haven't done something in a while, sometimes you just forget, which button to push. I hit one this morning, and John hit one this morning. So that's a key. I think that, and a lot of that happens in every session.
I think this is a key important point that you all just made about the need for help comes in different scales. There's the I have a blocker need, as in it's broken and it has to be fixed right now because it's an emergency and I need it to work. There's the I sent an email and you really need an answer right away, but it's going to take somebody 2 or 3 days before they reply. There's the ping us on Gitter here at TaxonWorks, where you probably get an answer pretty quickly most of the time. And this notion of creating your own sense of that. So in this community where you're together regular and that answer comes much more quickly. So your sense of frustration and is reduced and your sense of progress is increased, which is great. And I noticed y'all also briefly you have a Slack instance as well. So looking into new ways of being able to stay in touch with each other has also been something you're experimenting with. So wrap up. So what do you guys think about next?
There was also a couple questions in the chat, but maybe we can come to them. Dimitri asks, is it possible for a stray user to download Darwin core archive file of your data? Dimitri, we can, yes, once removed, not quite Chalcidoid data. So through the checklist bank, which UCD will ultimately get updated to, you'll have a GBIF version, which will get you a checklist Darwin Core version. So by proxy that way, we also need to get a checklist format export going. So that wouldn't be too hard for us to do, to get the basics of that so that you could parse that into global names. Gail asked, what came first, the taxa or the literature in terms of getting started in taxonomics? Gail, what comes first is what you have to do your science. If you're just putting together a database because it sounds like it's fun, then it's really up to you and it's sort of discussion. But if you have a real need, for example, if you're describing new species, you don't need to have any nomenclature. You can just start using TaxonWorks to record your matrices, store your images, gather your observations, gather your ideas about what these taxa are, and you can do that without any names. If you want a historical document, then you need perhaps the nomenclature as a backbone. Great, Gail. Let's see. I would say start either. Yeah, there was a discussion there. So I think in the interest of time, we should jump to our next one. We had a hand up. John,
Yeah. Matt, can we let them just recap the next steps or their final thoughts?
Yeah.
I just had one question about, so Luke brought up about the LSID issue. Is there a way of building in a function where it could do a quick search for a zoobank of the species name to add the LSID in there?
I have to refresh my mind on the zoobank API, but if they have an API, then in theory, yeah, we could have. It's another one of these wrappers that are being that need to be prioritized. Catalog of Life wrapper, Plazi wrapper. Zoobank, my guess is that the APIs aren't quite as good because it's sort of older tech, but we can see there's those IDs may also be propagated to something like Catalog of Life. So it's conceivable, John. Yeah.
Okay.
So final thoughts on the barbecue. I have a request. So your final thoughts, and could you consider including outsiders so they can come experience the barbecue?
Yes, of course, for sure. I think the easiest way, you can send me an email. I'll put it in the chat.
As long as they're willing to enter Chalcid names.
Well, or if you just want to lurk, as Matthew says, that's fine. You can send me an email and we'll get you on the list, or Luke. I think Luke expressed, our thoughts going forward very well. I think we're hopeful that if we're going to try and keep this group engaged, and I think we can probably catch up on the taxonomic nomenclatural literature, maybe, I don't know, in the next 6 months to a year. Where we go from there, there's two possibilities. One is to dive into all of the biological, natural history literature, biological control literature, which is very, very important to our community. It's the reason most of us have jobs. Or as Luke said, we've discussed working on the type information. That type information didn't entirely migrate over from UCD London. And it's been a dream of ours for many years to have, comprehensive database of type images of Chalcidoidea. I would say that there was some pretty discussion that got pretty far between Species File Group and the Smithsonian on getting images of Chalcidoid types over, but I think the pandemic kind of knocked that off the rails, and we probably need to get that started again. Luke, anything to add to that?
No, I think you've got it. I think we've hit everything.